Hey, how you getting on? It is I, the affordable John Brown. Sponsors, take note. Has this ever happened to you? Have you bought a piece of gear in the past, say an amplifier, tried it, liked it, but somehow didn't really bond with it, like it didn't really click, and then you end up selling that piece of gear, and through pure coincidence, you end up buying that same piece of gear a few years later and almost instantly clicking with it? Or does that just happen to psychos like me? Anyway, this video is about the Victory Kraken VX Mark I. So that's the way I like to set it up. In this video, I'll be checking out the amp. We're going to check out the functions, the channels, how it can sound, what it can do. And later I'll be shooting it out against this fine but slightly crooked stack of amplifiers behind me. So a few years ago, the Victory Kraken VX got a Mark II version with an additional presence knobs and some extra features. The Mark I is still available in some shops, but as far as I know, it's been discontinued. So it's the perfect opportunity for cheapskates like myself to pick up a Mark I of these for slightly cheaper. And that's what happened in late 2023, if I recall correctly. My good buddy Luke sold me a Victory Kraken VX, not this exact one, but I think a slightly earlier one than this. And I liked it, but I didn't love it. Somehow I couldn't really bond with it. And that was around the time when Daniel from Lichtlam Audio announced the Prometheus amplifier. And I knew immediately I'd want one of those. And I think it's the only new amp I own. So I sold a few amps to afford that. Quite a few got the chopping block. And one of them was the Victory Kraken VX. And the only thing that really bothered me about that is not that I sold it, but that I sold it rather quickly before I could make a video about that. And I always had some minor regrets about that. Fast forward almost 2 years, maybe 1.5 years, and my good buddy Luke has one again. And he's selling it. And I was this close to asking him if I could borrow it before he sold it, or if I could rent it from him, when he made me an offer I couldn't refuse on a package deal for a Victory Kraken. This Victory Kraken VX and a PRS NT15. Who needs financial stability anyway? Well, now I have 2 more amps. And much to my surprise, when I plugged this thing in for the first time, I loved it. Immediately bonded with it. Now, I don't know what that is, if my setup is slightly different, or my taste has changed a bit, or if it's part tolerances. You know, the components in amps are subject to high tolerances, resistors plus minus 10%, 20%, potentiometers sometimes up to plus minus 30%. No analog amplifier, well, all amplifiers are analog, I guess, will be exactly the same as the others. There's just too many components, resistors, capacitors, all that shite in there that just adds up to a unique package. So maybe this one just sounds nicer to me because it has a more fortunate combination to my ears of tolerances of the parts. Anyway, I'm off on a rant here. So the Victory Kraken VX is a 2-channel amplifier. It's got 50 watts. It takes both 6L6 and EL34 family tubes. This one is loaded with 6L6. It has a gain 1 channel, which is kind of Marshall inspired, I'd say. I heard it's based off an 800, but some of you guys commented on my community post that it was based off a 900. I'm not sure. And gain 2, the high gain channel, supposedly is based on a 5150. And that's why I chose these amps for the Shootout as well. This is the closest thing I have to a JCM 800 or 900. This is my JCM 2000 DSL 100. And of course, I have my Script PV5150 and another British amplifier, the Orange Rockerverb 15 Mark III. Both of these are 50 watt amps. Both of them are made in England, so I thought that'd be a decent candidate for a Shootout as well. There's no power amp controls like presence and resonance, but there is a bass focus button on the back that affects the negative feedback loop of the amp. If I understood that correctly, it changes the low end response. Just a regular 3-band EQ here, and 2 master volumes, which are only switchable by the included foot switch. So I want to start off with gain 2, see what that sounds like. that's with the gain at noon. Let's lower that. See how crunchy we can get. Lower that even more. Kind of starts cutting out there. I think this guitar isn't intonating properly. I need to set it up again. Give me a sec, I'll change guitars. No, I'm not reshooting that. Screw professionalism. Yeah, so yeah, heavy crunch. Does crunchy toes, although they're not tremendously fun. Let's up the gain because that's what this channel's for. It's more like, let's add a boost to that. What's that up there? Let's up the gain even more. Take the boost out, good and quiet. Packs a lot again, but I can't say it reminds me terribly of the 5150. I think the sweet spot is somewhere around here. That's kind of the sweet spot between, you know, beefiness and clarity, especially with the boost. Let's move over to gain 1. This channel is surprisingly fun to me. I really enjoy that. Even though I typically don't go for crunchy tones, I like heavy tones and the occasional very clean tone. Crunchy tones really aren't for me, but for some reason on this amp, they're a lot of fun. Let's see how low we can go. Switch over to this master for that. So we can't really get a clean tone out of this amp without messing with the volume knobs. On the guitar, that is. Perhaps with the coil tap, coil split. But it does great crunchies. Gotta switch back to the other ones. See how high we can get. I gotta say, maybe Gain 1 is the star of this amplifier for me, even though those aren't typically the gain levels and tones I tend to go for. It's just a lot of fun to play on this channel. It's very dynamic, it's very invigorating. Let's add a boost to the highest gain setting to see what that does. Messed it up in the end, but really cool sound. back and forth between game 1 and game 2. I really want to point out how well the channels are matched level-wise. I'm using the same master 1 for switching back and forth here, and there's not a huge difference in volume. In general, the volume doesn't seem to jump massively with increased gain settings, at least on game 1. Let's see how it is on game 2. Also, not huge volume jumps. I think that's pretty cool. Next, I want to check out the EQ, and to do that, I'm going to loop a riff through my Fractal FM3 and dial the EQ, twist some knobs, and we'll see on the screen with the Voxengo Span Plus what that does to the frequency response. Okay, everything's set to noon. I'm going to start with bass, go over to middle treble, and then we'll check out that bass resonance switch on the back. EQ strikes me as being rather effective for a passive EQ, especially the bass knob. If we dial it all the way down, the amp gets very thin, but from around 10 o'clock on this bass dial, the low end really pops up noticeably. Generally, this is quite a thick sounding amp to my ears, and I think we'll notice in the shootout later. After that, it's a little more subtle. I personally like it dialed a little lower, but it gets really thick around here. The mid and treble knobs, not an awful lot to say there. I think they are quite effective, but they don't make the amp sound harsh. I mean, if we up the treble all the way, it gets close to being harsh, but really the entire EQ range is somewhat usable to my ears. I personally like the amp with the bass a little lower, mid slightly bumped, and treble up a bit. Now, before we move on to the shootout, I want to try the bass resonance, what is it? The bass focus knob in the back, sorry. I'm on game 1 now, and it's not as noticeable as it was to me when I was playing the amp before this video. I want to switch over to game 2 and see if it's more noticeable there. It's a lot less subtle on game 2. The bass focus knob really affects the lows. It reminds me a bit of the, deep button on the DSL 100, not only for its function, but also how drastic it is. I'm afraid, much like on the DSL with the focus in, I think the amp gets a little too thin, and with the focus out, it's a little too boomy. And the DSL has the opposite problem with the switch in. It's really thick, and with the switch out, it's a little too thin. So the Mark II Kraken has a presence knob. I don't have any issues with the high end on this amp whatsoever. I think the treble is more than enough. On a Mark II Kraken, personally, I would have preferred a resonance knob rather than a presence knob so that I can get the low end where I like it. But that's personal preference, of course. I've been playing the amp on its high setting. There's a low power mode as well. Personally, I prefer to play loud amps quiet rather than quiet amps loud. Usually I don't like the low power settings on most amps. Let's give this one a try. I haven't really tested that myself before. Let's go to the low. This is real bedroom level. It's barely louder than my voice. I have to turn the master up quite a bit until I get to the same perceived volume level. So that doesn't sound much different to me. Might be a slight difference at the low end, but usable. Definitely cool feature if you're living in an apartment or can't play very loud. So before we go into the shootout, I opened this amp up a bit as well, looked into the bottom side of it. There's a plate you can take off there. The floor plate is connected to an earth wire. Everything looks well laid out to me. I'm not an expert, keep that in mind, but everything's labeled. Everything seems fairly accessible. You'll notice that there's a lot of cables in the way. They might be a little long, but personally, I think that's a good thing. That means you're probably going to be able to take out a bunch of these panels without having to desolder any cables, because that's, at least to me, that's always a bit of a pain in the ass, having to make sure that when you move cables, take notes, take photos so that you solder them back in the right place, because, yeah, that could be a real headache. Yeah, it looks decent to me. I don't have any complaints. Maybe somebody with more expertise would like to share a comment or two based on these images. Let's move on to the shootout. Righto, shootout time. It's the next day for me. You wouldn't know through the magic of television. The only thing giving it away is a fresh t-shirt and my face probably looking even more tired. But yeah, I'm being weird, aren't I? Said the guy to the empty room. Anyway, shootout time. I'm going to shoot the Kraken out against the Marshall DSL 100, Orange Rockerverb 50 Mark III, and the good old PV 5150 for the reasons I mentioned in the intro. I'll be switching back and forth between the amps using my KHE amp switcher up there, and I have noise, and I have the Red 7 Amp Central Evo in the loop of that with the 50% attenuation feature on that. So I've got an attenuator in the loop of the KHE amp switcher because I think, and I'm not alone with that opinion, that the 5150 really comes into its own when it's played loud. So you'd want the volume over 2, and this is kind of just over, yeah, it's almost a 3, which is pretty loud. That's band practice volume, at least it was when I still go to band practice. So that allows me to play the amps closer to their sweet spot without blowing my ears off, and that's probably the only way I could look even stranger if I didn't have any ears. Anyway, let's go. Let's start off by shooting out the Kraken against the 5150, obviously on gain 2. I can see where they're coming from. The Kraken doesn't have that 5150 mid gonk going on, what people refer to as the cocked wah mids, something I find very hard to pronounce for some reason. Reason. Wow. Geez, I need to get a bed. Anyway, but similar gain structures, similar gain levels. I mean, even if the dials don't indicate that, because the gain on the Kraken is at about 1 o'clock, and it's only at 4, which is maybe 11 o'clock on the 5150. I find both the amps kind of, they don't get any more gain after these points. They just start to saturate more to a point where I find them less usable. So I've got them both at their gain sweet spot to my ears, and that's about the same levels of gain. Still, even if we crank the mids on the 50, not the 50, the Kraken, I don't think they'll sound similar in that regard. Not really. Different mid emphasis, and I think the Kraken has a little more string clarity. The chords ring out nicer to me. Let's add a boost to that and see what that does. I think the boost kind of emphasizes that mid honk that the 5150 has. At least it's more apparent to me in the room right now with the boost. String clarity, I think, though, goes to the Kraken. Yep, I still think the Kraken has more string clarity. Not as close to the 5150 as I would have expected from the marketing blurbs, the YouTube videos, but similar gain levels. I like them both. Let's compare that to the Marshall DSL. That's how I've got the DSL set. I'm going to compare the DSL to gain 1 on the Kraken. That is uncanny. They're really close sounding, at least in the room here. I hope the microphone doesn't betray me and make me sound like an idiot on the internet, but in the room they sound almost identical. Really close, and they both have buttons for the low end. The Kraken on the back, bass focus. I'm putting that in, and I'm taking the deep out of the Marshall, which will make both of them sound a good bit thinner. Let's see how that goes. The effect seems to be a bit more severe on the Marshall. I'm going to put it back in. It's just a little experiment. It doesn't really bear much relevance. But it's not a boost. With a boost in front, they sound a little different. The difference is more apparent to me right now than it is without the boost. I couldn't describe the difference though. I'd find it hard to put to words because it's subtle. But without the boost, they're so close. Really cool. I'm very surprised. I didn't expect that. Okay, the low end is more apparent on the Marshall, at least on the lower strings when playing open chords like that. And the bass is pretty low. So the effect of that button, the deep button, seems to have a wider swing than the bass focus button on the Victory Kraken. Let's finish this off by comparing the Kraken to the other British head, and there's the Rockerverb 50 Mark III. For this, I'm going back to gain 2 on the Victory Kraken. Obviously, the Kraken has more saturation. Let's bump the gain a bit on the orange. Interesting enough, the Kraken seems to pack more low end and more saturation than the orange, but the orange has a nice natural tone as well, whatever the hell that means. Let's add a boost to that. I chose the Rockerverb for the comparison because the amps on paper are similar in that they're both British 50-watt high gain amplifiers with 2 channels and almost no power amp EQ controls. As I mentioned several times now, the Victory Kraken has that bass focus knob on the back, but no resonance and no presence dials, much like the Orange Rockerverb. The Orange Rockerverb has interesting features such as the reverb and the attenuator on board that the Victory Kraken doesn't have, but they both have a 3-band EQ and yeah, limited controls. Other than that, I mean, the Kraken has a really nice crunch channel that does Marshall tones fantastically well. The Rockerverb doesn't have a crunch channel, it has a clean channel that stays crystal clean. I don't think the Rockerverb is, well, it can do crunches, but you have to commit if you're in a live situation. You can either have a nice crunch or a thick high gain and a clean. Whereas on the Victory Kraken, you can either have, yeah, you can have a nice crunch with various degrees of heaviness and a nice high gain tone. It doesn't really do cleans. The Mark II does cleans. It has 2 modes for the clean channel. I'd love to try that out. It has a presence knob. But as I said, I'd actually much more prefer a resonance knob rather than a presence knob on a Victory Kraken Mark II. Yeah, I think that does it for me. Hard to describe the differences between the Rockerverb and the Kraken. They both have their distinct tones. The orange tone is pretty unique, very unique mid signature to it. Personally, between those two, for what I like to play, I'd probably choose the Kraken. The comparison to the 5150 is obviously difficult. They both deliver similar levels of high gain. The 5150 is iconic, and for good reason though, so that's not a fair fight. I wouldn't want to choose between them. The Marshall, yeah, I love the JCM 2000 DSL. I'm a big fan of DSLs in general. But again, I think the Kraken did a cracking job at delivering the same tones. So yeah, I'm impressed. So I kind of mushed my final thoughts in there without even knowing it. Yeah, I think the Kraken is a cracking app. Sorry, I can't stop. Given that the Mark II has been out for a while, you might be able to pick one of these up cheap on the used market, which I definitely recommend. Buy used, but if you can't avoid buying new, use one of my affiliate links down below. Maybe get a Mark II if you definitely want a new one. It's a big help for the channel. I'll be making some profiles of this amp for NAM, Tonix, and Quad Cortex. So you can probably, yeah, you'll be able to download a free one from those portals. Just find me. I'm either the other John Brown or TOJB. And for my Patreon supporters, I'll be making capture packs. So you'll be able to find one little capture for free, and you'll have to pay for the full pack. Yeah, I think that's all. Surprising end. Well, the wheels came off there at the end, very much unscripted, but I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful to you to assess if the Victory Kraken is a feckin' fly, it's annoying me. Hope you could assess if the Victory Kraken is an amp suitable for you. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye!